Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Life After GDPR podcast where we discuss digital marketing in a post-GDPR world. In today's episode, I'm joined by Timo Dechau. Timo is the founder of Deepskydata Analytics, a analytics implementation agency which he founded. And Timo is a fellow data enthusiast. He's always sharing knowledge about new tools he's experimenting with. He recently released a course about how to build your own measurement plan, free course, I want to add. And he's always sharing knowledge, mostly on LinkedIn, so you should definitely follow him there. So we explore a lot of topics about implementation, documentation, about the value of how to structure your events and how to think about that before diving into which tool to choose. How to handle perhaps marketing analytics in a world where Google Analytics is no longer allowed. So it's a really fun podcast. Quick disclaimer, unfortunately, this is needed. I am not a lawyer. I am not a privacy expert. My guest today is not a lawyer, but even if my guest was a lawyer, nothing on this podcast is legal advice and should be taken as legal advice. You should always evaluate with legal counsel before you decide upon any route you want to take. In this podcast, we simply try to explore the topic of digital marketing in a world where data privacy is now a more important topic than it was a couple of years ago. And we try to figure out how this influences our field of work and what we can do, how we can help. And we try to invite as many guests that can shed a little bit of light on this topic from their point of view. So take that and enjoy the podcast. Normally I ask other people to describe themselves, but I'm going to describe you as the guy who has tested every analytics tool out there, or at least tries to. Is that an accurate description?
I think that's a valid description. It's it's cool and it's a pain on the other side as well.
Yeah, you take it upon you.
Yeah, kind of. No, I mean, I think I'm a very natural, curious person. And so, of course, like when something is new is popping up, I basically have to discipline myself not to immediately leave everything beside and do a full setup with this new thing. So, but yeah, I still try it. So I have a backlog of like tools that I want to try out, and then I'll try at least to do one test a week.
Well, that's a nice way to keep on learning to make sure that you continue.
That's true. Yeah.
Besides testing new tools, what else do you do?
I mean, it would be great if you would just make a living out of testing tools, and I still have some ideas to do that. But let's say my daily job is really like to help different kind of companies to basically get their tracking or AKA data collection right. And so like, I mean, there could be different use cases. So some come to me and say, okay, we haven't really started out, so we need to get an idea what kind of initial stack we should build up and what kind of events we should collect. These are the easier ones because like you basically start on a green field. The more complicated ones are the ones that come to me and say, yeah, actually we track 400 events and we don't really use them and we need to clean up. And so how do we clean up? And this, of course, like definitely doable, but of course, like it requires more work because you have to incorporate all the legacy things and how to handle these kind of things. But these are basically like the things. So at some point I decided, I was working on the full data stack, so also doing data warehouse setups and so, but at some point I decided to just focus on where the data is coming from. Because, I mean, I spend 70% of my time also on data warehouse to fixing these things. And so I thought, okay, maybe we fix it at the source and not downstream.
I can really resonate on that. Like, that's also part of what we end up doing, like trying to make sure that it's right when it goes in, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So it's probably worthwhile to invest in the collection phase and making sure that it's properly set up.
And the problem is like really like the garbage really has different kind of levels. So it can be technical. So this is often like, of course, like an obvious problem that, for example, someone forgets where an event is triggered. This is already also garbage. So when you don't really know where your newsletter subscribed event is triggered. So just when someone clicks the submit button, or when, like say, the subscription is successfully registered in your system, be like the obvious point. And so, but you don't know it. And so this is already garbage too. And another garbage, what I already mentioned, is like, if you just track everything or a lot of things, and then you have, I always love these kind of tracking setups that are, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, and they sometimes have 6 or 7 events that are basically the same thing, but no one really knows which is the right thing. So it's really like an excavation. So you basically remove one layer of the next layer and discover new things. And yeah, sometimes we also just decide, okay, we build something new next to it, and then try to see what we move over.
Yeah, that has been my approach lately, just as well, because, well, we mainly do Google Stack implementations. And because of Google Analytics 4 migration, and it in most cases makes sense to just leave the old container, set up server-side tag manager, set up a new tag manager, a client-side, and build GA4 in that. And then once you're done there, migrate all the other tags over from the old container that you think are necessary, and then you just throw off the old container. It's an easier way than to try to work in that old container where like 9 years of employees didn't look at the old tags and just implemented new tags on top of each other.
Yeah, and you will find some old Facebook image tags in there still lingering around for 5 years already. And still, I think the crazy amount is like when you look into tag management setups, and I totally understand why it is a problem. I mean, it's often really like kind of an ownership problem, and the tag managers move through ownership over time. So there are tag managers who had 10 or 20, 15 different owners. But when you look into it, and like you see it from the perspective where you as a business voluntarily share your business data with all these different kind of companies, and you're still sending out all your revenue, your orders to advertisement platform you worked with 8 years ago, or sometimes even like to agencies you worked with 8 years ago. Especially under this perspective, it's quite interesting when you tell people this, then they start to think, maybe we should really do a check-in every 2 months to clean up things. But it's a nice idea to basically do a new setup. I think you should maybe also like do a post about this. I think this is something that people would love to learn, because I think a lot of people now struggle how they approach GA4, and they just pop it into this overcrowded container. And so, but it's a good possibility to clean up now.
Yeah, if ever, right? Then this is the moment, right? Because you can't inherit anything from Universal Analytics anyway. So you might just start from scratch and clean up and figure out what you actually use. I think Tag Manager having a lot of owners over the years, I think that's a really good point. And I think it also ties in really well with the topic of data privacy. Like what has happened is the focus was on making it easy for marketers to implement pixels. And for years, that has been the focus. Probably there were some people who were thinking about privacy, but most people were just thinking about, wow, look at all these possibilities. Like you can just implement this pixel, then you can measure your advertising effectiveness. This is amazing, right? So the focus was on that. And then Tag Manager was like, now you can implement them even faster without bothering your IT department, right? So that created this shit show that we're in right now, where first of all, we went all overboard with all this third-party JavaScript of, Facebook, Google, or, even way more obscure players that we implemented. And like you correctly mentioned, they harvest all data about all your visitors, which is really strange, right? It will be like you own a supermarket and you share all the video data from within your supermarket about all your people that walk around with all these third-party companies. Like all the video data, you just share it with them willingly. So that's a really weird thing. But yeah, it happened because we got a little bit over-enthusiastic about this, about the effectiveness of measuring return on investment. And then the ownership, like you said, like it was, people didn't see any harm in it. And then employee number 1 implemented some tags. Employee number 2 implemented some tags. Nobody cleans up, because who likes cleaning up, right? Nobody does that. It's like, and then 9 years later, you have a tag manager container with with stuff that nobody understands, and nobody really knows why it's firing, how it's firing, what's triggering it, and what data it contains.
That's true. And the interesting thing, but I would still say, so like in let's say in the defense for tag manager, like the great thing about it is it's in one place. So I mean the worst case that you had before was like the scripts were scattered across your website and not even like on the same page. So sometimes all on the confirmation page, of course, but I mean others were there, and so it was really hard to figure out where they are. But I think you mentioned something which is, I think, really important, which I still hope that it will get introduced in, let's say, tag management systems in a better way. Is like all this ownership topic, because I think ownership in general, data is of course like relies a lot on ownership, and tag manager is super hard. So even so for example, when I work on really big setups, so sometimes in let's say in big organizations, they have one tag manager setup, which I think is in general a good idea. It's definitely better to have than to have 15 containers that kind of doing the same job. But then they even have a very good technical setup. So it's even like that you can even say no really flaws in there. So naming conventions are fine. They don't really have, let's say, tags that are not connected anymore, or like some triggers that basically don't have tags. And so it's in a good shape, but still has a lot of problems, because in the end, there are basically, how to say, 40 or 50 different stakeholders who have some stakes in the tag manager, and they have a stake on different levels. So of course, there's a technical stake. So there's a team that runs the tag manager technically. But then there are different business teams who rely on this kind of data, and sometimes they don't rely, and of course they miss to telling them each other. So like, no, actually we don't work with this agency for 3 years for now, and so you can just remove it. And so I think this is really interesting to figure out how to handle these kind of, let's say, ownerships and communication on that.
Yeah, we have an interesting project going on for one of our larger clients where we are doing the migration, as I just said. So we took this opportunity to deploy server side, deploy a new client side container, and then build out GA4 in there. And then we realized, okay, this is also a good moment to think about this ownership topic, because we saw what happened in the old container, right? And we don't want to repeat the mistakes, right? Learn from what we've been doing. And they are a 360 client, so they have Google Tag Manager zones. That's already something that is interesting from like a giving ownership perspective, right? Like restricting where and how people can deploy what types of tags. So you could give certain users access to a zone that can only deploy Google Analytics tags or Floodlight tags, or maybe not publish but only ask for approval. So that's one part of it. But I think what is really valuable is like the integration with two things, or they could be the same tool, is a knowledge base where it's documented what it is. So what we currently have is like a link. We use coda.io, which is like Notion or all these other things. But basically each tag manager tag has like a link to the specific thing in Coda, and in Coda there's also a link to the specific tag in Tag Manager, so the IDs are shared, and it works via the API. So you have like the documentation is centralized, sort of. And then one next step that we want to add is have like the approval queue, because we are basically so for this client we publish, they don't publish. They can ask for approval, or they can just request to us like, hey, can you help me with this tag? Or they can set it up themselves and then say, hey, can you approve it? And then we go through it. But getting that set up in like something like, in our case, Asana, which we use, like getting that streamlined and synced with like the client Slack channel. So basically there's one place where they can see, okay, we requested these tags and we are going to deploy them. And then I think the thing that should be added is like after a tag is deployed, a year later, it should be put into the into the system again, like revise if this tag is still being used, right? And if it's still needed or whatever. So And then each year, each tag pops up again. Like, is it still being used? Is it still being owned? Who is the owner? Because otherwise you're never gonna do it. Like you need some trigger. Like, oh yeah, okay, we added that tag a year ago. Is that agency still working for them? Are they still the owner of the tag, or is like the other agency now the owner of the floodlight tag? But yeah, you need to that requires a lot of thinking and mapping out. That has nothing to do necessarily with like data implementation itself. It only has to do with, I don't know what to call it, quality of work or something. Yeah.
No, process, operations, I guess, in the end. No, this is really interesting because I have a quite similar project. And so we settled first not on Coda. I mean, we should have used maybe something like Airtable or Coda because like it's definitely better to work with, but we started out with Sheets, and we did the same thing. So we basically implemented a operational and ownership mapping layer on top of GTM, also like communicating via API, so syncing via API, different kind of information. And we, for example, we even took, but we're not sure if this really works out, but we even took like the harder way. We even put expiration dates on it. So it's even not like it's up for notice. So basically, at some point, at least this is how we planned, is like a tag basically enters a, let's say, a process where it fades out automatically. So it's at some point it gets an expiration date, then it gets set on pause after this expiration date automatically. And then basically the owner has a possibility before, of course, he or she gets emails and notifications. So here, it's like a domain. So basically, your tag is about to expire. So either you basically, and you cannot set it on auto renew. So you have to proactively say,
that's a great
we
idea.
still want that. And then it goes on pause, and in some place, of course, like it goes really out and out of the system.
Yeah.
So
that's a great idea because
I don't know.
Because with our approach, what will happen is people will be like, yeah, sure, it's good. Just click done on the task, right? And not check it actually. And by pausing it, you have to take action. You have to.
Which is, I think, totally normal because in the end, you just disrupt their day with that. So it's like, so, okay, they are thinking about marketing campaigns, and then someone comes around and say, yeah, actually, do you need this tag? And so it usually requires at least some thinking. Sometimes it's straightforward. So when you know, okay, this is a tag from let's say an old agency, then yeah, sure, you just take it out. But sometimes it's complicated to decide.
So what I've seen, for instance, with affiliate networks, right? Like there's a gazillion of them, and then they seem to die and start new ones every day, right? So those pixels, like it's definitely worth to evaluate each year.
I would still say, so if you really want to reduce or increase the quality of your tag manager and reduce the workload of the team that is handling the tag manager, just forbid to use affiliate programs. Because I would say, looking back on like extensive tag manager retainers, 70-80% affiliate. So everything else, I don't know, Google Ads, analytics, always pretty straightforward, not so many changes and so on. Affiliate, constantly changing. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, maybe that changes when they all move to a server-side API, but I'm not too hopeful for that.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, in the end, like affiliate always struggles that they don't get. I mean, they are really like depending on getting this final signal. And so I think this drives them to always come up with new ideas to get this signal so they can make money. So the good thing for Google, I mean, Google and Facebook already have the money once people land on your website. So of course they would like to learn a lot about conversions and so on, but they don't really have a lot of stakes in that. Affiliate has a lot of stakes because basically their business model depends on that. And so
yeah, that's a great point. I haven't thought about it like that. Yeah, Google needs the conversion data to prove to you that their advertisement was useful. But in the end, if you would do incrementality tests without any tracking, you would also figure out like, hey, Google is, it's redirecting some valuable traffic. Whereas with the affiliates, yeah, it's an after the fact thing. They first send you the traffic, then they convert, and then they have to trust you to tell them that user converted, right?
I think this is, you just mentioned a very interesting topic. And I think, I don't know, maybe you see this as well. It's like, I mean, with all like, let's say GDPR requirements. So of course, like you have consent, so you ask for consent. So of course, like the data volume drops that you can basically get. what I see now in a lot of projects is like that. Of course, like always before were like tensions between classic online marketing agencies and let's say analytics departments or analytics teams. And these tensions definitely grew bigger because now like you often get like from, let's say, agencies that they say, okay, we basically cannot optimize anymore because like we are bound so much to these algorithms of these platforms, and these platforms need basically, I mean, their food are like conversions. So like, let's say indicators that something is successful because all the algorithms works on that. And so they say like, when we reduce this, so we definitely will get increasing costs, which I think is definitely possible. So I never really spent a lot of time to dive into. But it's interesting to see because you just mentioned like, imagine you would judge Google Ads when you just switch off tracking, which like in the old days when you did Google or ad when it was still AdWords. So the tracking was not so big and sophisticated. Also, like there were sometimes really lag in time, so you didn't really have the systems that you had there. So in that time, like often like they I know that at least some companies really drove these kind of tests where they aggressively in specific kind of targetings and areas really like switch it off, measure the volume changes on all, let's say, metrics that are on operational level, like, I don't know, orders and so on. And by that, making basically models to get an idea what specific kind of channels are bringing in, which you still have to do with, let's say, these with display influencers and TV and so on, which you, of course, cannot really track. And so what are your experience like to work with these, how to say, this conflicts between marketing agencies who say, okay, when we cannot track, we cannot work, and like coming up with different ways?
I've seen this especially with companies that move towards a more mixed media approach, right? So once they start doing out of home, not digital out of home, but just out of home advertising, TV advertising, then usually one of the more traditional attribution agencies, like from the traditional advertising world, comes in to help, right? To basically help them with, and they've been doing these incrementality tests, you know, for years, for decades, for however long. And I think in digital we are spoiled with deterministic measurement, and we are now, due to privacy, well, both privacy legislation and privacy technology is enforcing it and legislation is prescribing it, we are going towards more probabilistic measurement. And I think these incrementality tests are really valuable. But what I've seen in the past, they do require quite some volume to give you a good view of what's going on. So I know eBay has done a lot, and that's already quite some time ago. But I used to work for the Dutch eBay when I worked at an agency before, and there they also did a lot of incrementality testing by simply switching off, for instance, advertising via Google Ads for a certain category, right? So they had these pillars of categories on the platform, and then switching it off and on for a certain category for a specific amount of time. And that was really interesting because you could clearly see that there is an impact, but the impact is never as big as what Google would like you to believe, right? Or what any other advertising source would like you to believe. And that's to be expected, because if you only use Google Ads and that's the only way people can discover your website, then sure, right? But once you start using multiple sources and you start getting word of mouth and you start getting customers that refer each other and talk about your brand, and then of course it's, it becomes more complicated, and the preciseness of our digital measurement is actually fooling us because it looks so precise, so you're inclined to believe it, but actually it is hiding the complexity of what is really going on.
I think this is kind of, let's say, the side effects of all this GDPR things that I quite like. So because it basically takes away this mask of this is a precision engine, which it never was. I mean, like I think we all who are in this industry, we can all remember this time when like attribution models was super hot and like everyone was basically calling like, yeah, we want our own attribution model. So we are definitely ready for that. And in that time it was already super complicated and also like complicated to showcase that. I mean, it's a model and it has the term model, let's say for a reason, because it's a model. And I think this was strange times as well, where people were really assuming in the end we will just have a machine that is basically, so we build a great product, we just plug in the marketing black box, and then the marketing black box is just selling it out. And so we don't have to do anything. So like basically really like the developer's paradise. So you just develop a great product, stuck in the marketing machine, and then everything works by itself. But yeah, I think it's quite interesting because like I think now it brings back all the, let's say, at some point really ignored things of marketing. I don't know, positioning, branding, and so on, and all the different kinds of things. Brings it back, which I guess they were never really gone, and they were always important. But like, I mean, they could be easily ignored, especially when you're really driving this hot selling e-commerce models. Where, of course, like when you were really good, at least in the first place, where like AdWords was not so crowded yet, you could build amazing models. So really, like if you understand the machine and go for it, and you had some money to basically pump into the machine, I mean, there were companies just living out of that.
I would go a step further. I would say it exposes digital marketing. So I think there's a lot of companies that got started on, for instance, Google Ads, but also later on, there's a wave that got started on Facebook ads. And there will now be a group of companies that get started on TikTok ads. And then after that, there will be Smoke ads, right? Whatever. But I think what they are showing is that if you are a first mover to an advertising platform where the gap between the amount of eyeballs that are on it and what you have to pay for getting in front of those eyeballs is still really wide, then you are going to profit off of that, right? Because you are chasing attention, and attention has shifted from platform A to platform B, usually because platform A was over monetizing and people left because they were like, I'm only looking at ads. Like if you currently see comments on Instagram, like about Instagram, like I don't even see people from my own feed anymore. That's what people say. And they switch to TikTok because they like it better. I can 100% guarantee that on TikTok, the same is going to happen because they're going to get that advertiser money in. Then they're going to up the advertisements, and then a new platform comes out and people move there, right? So and I think the first mover will always benefit from that. And I think that has maybe overemphasized the value of digital marketing and has also allowed for all this complexity to arise around it. Because I think a lot of the things that we have built around these models give us, in some cases, a fake sense of control. Like with analytics, I think for some companies, we track everything and we put it in a dashboard for them, and then hopefully they look at the dashboard, but they don't take any action on the data, right? It's just to verify. It's a verification, or it gives them maybe some trust or some certainty, but it's not actually helping them take action and optimize. For a lot of companies, it's more showing what is happening rather than informing decision making. And I think this will expose a lot of that, because once that data starts to crumble, but then if the business stays the same and the data crumbles, then basically you're going to figure out, yeah, we didn't even use that data.
I think this is maybe another side effect of GDPR that I guess now, maybe at least like I think maybe some companies will start to ask themselves the question, what would happen if we just remove everything? So if we remove the dashboards, if we remove the analytics, does it change something in our company? And I think the honest ones might arrive at the point where they say, actually not. So as you said, so like often like you have these dashboards, and so I mean, like I would not say call it a trick, but of course, like sometimes it happens, things break in these kind of things. And where I really get scared is like when something is breaking and it breaks 4 weeks ago. And because I don't have monitoring in place, which of course like then is my fault, but no one else recognized this. This definitely is a big pointer that something's going wrong.
I think it's one of the side effects of Google Analytics being free, right? So when something is free, it's really hard to say let's not do it, and then it creates this fake sense of safety because having this data somehow gives managers the feeling like seeing that the amount of visitors to the website is at a certain level gives them, some form of safety, but it's not actually being used to optimize. So I would argue, indeed, if you remove the time staring at numbers and invest that time into doing something valuable for your customers, probably netto for a lot of businesses at the end of the year, they're going to be better off than staring at the numbers, which they don't use to inform any decisions with.
And this, I think, is like the light version of this insanity. I think the how to say, the heavy version is basically like people investing millions in a data stack and doing the same thing. It's like, I mean, this is quite interesting. So I started out with analytics in 2006. So basically like when the first real Google Analytics version was coming out. And I think it took 4 or 5 years to basically fight to get some acceptance for analytics, because like it was not like that everyone was embracing it. It was more like that people were highly skeptical about these things. And so I know that I had to prove a lot of things before people were really like taking it into account. And I was always envisioning this kind of future where everyone is using it. And yeah, so then I saw like how everything goes to the other end, where it became totally hip and like kind of a requirement to use analytics. And I think this is also like maybe some of the reasons that we have today is like that people think you have to do analytics, and so you do it. So of course, like when you want to do analytics, so you Google, or I think it's not even like that you Google. I mean, of course, like then you might come across Google Analytics. I think it's almost like that. Of course, like you ask colleagues or you ask friends in other companies, what are you doing? And so, and then it's basically spreading. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think every CMS has like, in the settings field, there's like fill out your Google Analytics ID, right? That already. How many times I've had a client like, okay, can you? We want to implement Google Analytics, so I'm like, okay, let's walk through the steps. And they're like, no, we just need the ID. Like they're like, okay, wait a second, what are you gonna do? Yeah, and then they're like, yeah, but we need to fill it out here, and then it's done, right? Okay, but that also, of course. From the web developer point of view, it also became like a default thing. Like, you deliver a website that has analytics, right? I don't think any web developer would disagree like that. At least clients want it, but I think in most cases now, actually, the web development agencies themselves will offer some basic form of, okay, we will have Google Analytics page views on there, right?
Yeah, but I think this is like you already said. So like it's kind of the time now to, when we were talking about Tag Manager. So I mean, this is like the interesting time as well. So like it's a good time to revisit everything. I mean, everyone was jumping on this GA train for years, and I did the same. I mean, I started out with Google Analytics because it was the best way to start out with analytics. And we still have to say, and I still say it, like Google Analytics is a good product. It's definitely so. It's not like that.
It's hard to beat free.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be free. So it would be even there when people had to pay it, because like it did a lot, especially like when you followed up the whole journey. So I started to use GA Classic, I think 2006. So it was really like the first things. It was the time when you couldn't create segments. So segments, for example, was not introduced yet. So when you wanted to segment your traffic, you had to create a new view, and the view took 2 days to populate. And so when you did the filtering wrong, you had to wait another 2 days. So sometimes it took 3 weeks to come up with a new segmentation. And to see how Google was really like evolving over this time, and like to speed up the whole machine. That was impressive. So when you work with the early systems, and I mean, I was working in some projects still with, let's say, some competitors, which I will not name out. And when you work with them, it was a pain, because these systems were super slow, super clunky, and it still is. And so like it's natural that you really understand that. I mean, why Google, of course, like got this cut of attention, not just because it was free, not just because Google did a great job to tell people, yeah, if you want to use AdWords, you should also use analytics and so. And I think they're really like different reasons. But the interesting thing is now is really like, I guess it's now really like a first opportunity to revisit this kind of strategy. And I think this is like the interesting time to really see, actually, what is our data strategy and how does it look like? And I don't say it's a super simple talk, so it's super highly complicated. I mean, it's like it's deciding on your software stack. So, I mean, if you build an application, it's the same thing. So you have to decide at some point, how would you want to do this? Do we go with buying something and put this as a core? Do we build everything ourselves? Do we do microservices? I don't know. So it's the same with data stacks. It's the same. So you can make, really, really different decisions based on what you really need.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I think privacy regulation is maybe the trigger that we all needed, but I think we could argue that even if there was nothing with regards to privacy regulation, still there's now way more to choose from and better solutions for certain use cases, right? Than to just go blindly with Google Analytics.
Maybe I think privacy definitely helped to speed the whole thing up, but I think the tendency was already there, because like what I often see is like the different kind of projects that I do is like the gaps sometimes are really huge when you look at the different kind of companies, how they embrace basically data and how they would put data into their product development. And this is sometimes really scary when you see how big the difference is. I mean, of course, everyone is pointing out then on companies like Netflix and Uber and Airbnb and say, yeah, they have 200 people and so on. Yes, they have these kind of people, but they have a totally different approach and philosophy when it comes to data. So data is an essential part. It's like technology. It's like their software. And so it's thought in different ways. So because of that, they go different routes and go different kind of approaches, because they know when they improve something on their data setup at some point, I mean, maybe increase data quality by 5%, it in the end has an immediate effect on their business. I think when you come to the stage where data is contributing let's say a part of your revenue that you can attribute, because like, for example, you have a specific recommendation engine in your product, and you know this needs to feed with data, then data plays a totally different role. And then, for example, like then to betting on introducing an external system is definitely a business risk, because in the end, you basically, let's assume you basically make 10 million out of this recommendation engine because you know this from the data. And then to place a bet on a new system or a different system that you don't even own and that it's a black box and you can't really look into it. And they say, yeah, I put my 10 millions on this kind of thing. Interesting choice. No one will basically go through this. And I think this is like where like the minds are starting to shift and like the decisions are starting to shift. It's quite interesting to see these kind of companies that are in this stage.
If data is a competitive advantage to your company, right? So if it's a structural element of what you provide, then the decision should, by definition, already top down be, okay, we want to own this, right? We want to be on top of this. And what I also see is, so I work a lot on the marketing side of things. I think you also do. I think a lot. Google Analytics has, for obvious reasons, always been a lot on the marketing side, because it came along with Google Ads, right? So, and I see at a lot of companies now, I see the realization of, okay, data is or should be a competitive advantage of us, in our business model. And then they start building a data warehouse based on product data recommendation engine. So let's say it's a travel website, right? And they want to serve you the best search result based on whatever kind of inputs. But then you start to see this segregation where, okay, we now have internal data, product data, and then we have Google Analytics or alternative, right? Most times still Google Analytics, which is only being used by marketeers just for conversion. Basically attribution, right? And what I saw a couple years ago was a lot of companies trying to stuff Google Analytics with a lot of data, like also this product data. And now I'm seeing the separation where, okay, let's just do the conversion, like the landing page hit and the conversion in Google Analytics. That's enough for marketeers. We're not going to make it more complex than that. Use it for attribution. Maybe, add to cart and then conversion. So you have like beginning of funnel, end of funnel, and you have landing page hit. And then all the other complex stuff, we have our data engineers and they don't even talk to the marketing people, right? They don't want to, they're just building their own stuff for the recommendation engine or whatever, whatever their business is. And I feel that also, that complements what you just said. Like a lot of companies are realizing how important data is for them, and they took steps to build that. And I think for marketing now, the stick is privacy regulation, where we're realizing like, okay, if data is also really important to marketing, so if you really if you spend a lot, that's usually the first thing to look at. If your ad spend is really high and you spend across multiple channels, then probably your conversion data is important enough for you to consider an alternative to Google Analytics, right? Because the chances of you being able to use Google Analytics in the future will become less and less if you operate within the European Union. But yeah, you will have to evaluate like, okay, let's say you spend 20 million a month, right? And you do that across, I don't know, 10, 15 channels. If you don't have conversion tracking anymore, will you still be able to spend efficiently? If yes, then good. You don't need analytics, right? So you just keep on spending. But otherwise, you have to build some solution. I wanna explore that with you. Like, let's say we have this client, right? This client, it's a client in GDPR region, and let's assume for a second that, you're in Denmark, right? The Danish DPA just said Google Analytics is also not allowed, at least not in the default implementation.
The interesting thing what they did is like they even pointed out that it was a European decision, which no one else said before. So it was really like they already spoiled what will happen in other countries as well.
So let's take that as a given, right? Let's say Google Analytics, they have this. Okay, you can use it in a proxied form, but basically then you're losing all the value. So let's just assume Google Analytics out the window, right? We are a company spending 20 million a month across 10 online sources. What are we going to do? All the tools. Where are we going to switch to?
I think there are different ways. So the first important part you already said, data stacks are splitting up. So even like Google Analytics, and in most of the setup that I do, Google Analytics is just a satellite anymore. It's not like a core thing. So we basically move it out. We use different things as a core thing where we basically collect all the data, and then it might be passed on to Google Analytics as well and as you said, like for landing page and so on. So what kind of tool we are using? I think this, of course, it depends on the setup of the company. So first of all, I think one criteria, for example, which I always ask is like, how do conversions look like? So are you built in a way that you convert wherever you want to convert? So we can talk about this as well. It's like, but if you, for example, can make sure that a conversion usually happens pretty quickly. So let's say in the easy case, you sell shampoo. So of course, like people come on your website, buy a shampoo, go away. So usually like conversion time frame within a day. So definitely quick selling and so on. But it could be also like if you are a, let's say, B2B software as a service startup, then of course, like you could try to sell people into your product, but this takes time. So usually like in this kind of case, what the people try to do is like they want to get the people as quickly as possible in their CRM systems. And so they work with lead magnets and so on. So like there's the same scenario. So you usually get people on, let's say, a landing page and they can download the white paper. So usually it's like you immediately convert them in a way. And so if you have this scenario that you convert more quickly, then of course you could go with let's say the interesting breed of how they call themselves, like privacy first analytics provider or cookie-less tracking provider, so that they don't set a cookie, where at the moment we assume this is totally legal, which when at some point it might land in front of a court and maybe a court makes a different decision. But I mean, what these kind of tools are doing is like they reduce the identifiable I don't know. So like the data that you use to identify a user, they reduce it to this window of maximum 24 hours, because what they do is like they take the IP, they shorten the IP, they take maybe sometimes the user agent as well, and then they basically create a daily salt based on the date, and then they create a hash, and this hash basically rotates because the date is included. It rotates after 24 hours. And so by that, they reduce basically the possibility to track users over a long span of time.
What is also interesting about it is that the identifier that they place, let's say that another source, so Google or Facebook, would read out that identifier, then also they would only be able to use that identifier for 24 hours, right? That's the thought behind it.
Yeah, and they don't even persist it. So they usually just use it in their kind of system. So even like other systems could not basically grab these kind of IDs and match it up with their IDs and then build these. I mean, these were all the funky things that people were doing in the past. So it's definitely a difference to how all the other analytics tools are working. And this, for example, could be a way. So that you use this kind of data to at least get all your marketing information. What you could also do is like then, even if you want to go a step further and you want to prove a data privacy agency that you really take care of these kind of problems. So for example, you could make sure that you don't even care about this unique identifier. So you basically send the data in some kind of analytics tool just by identifying them from the marketing campaign or marketing source. So like the most granular level that you want to track marketing on. So be it on campaign level, ad level, or whatever you want to do. And so you use this as an identifier. So I built, for example, one system with a company where they said, okay, we just want to have a marketing reporting. So we don't really care about what users are doing. So we just want to know how our campaigns are performing. And so we were just sending data into the system by using the campaign as an identifier. So the campaign could be something that they provide with a parameter, or it could be like a shortened referrer, or it could be just if we don't have information, then it's just direct. And so this were the things that we were sending into the analytics systems, because in the end, they just wanted to have a campaign reporting. And so we built them campaign reporting. So we were reducing the things that we were tracking beforehand, but still they had full campaign reporting across the full funnel. And I would approach it first from this point.
I think that's also what WebKit is promoting with their link tracking solution, which is still a little bit rudimentary, I think. But basically they say, okay, we only want to, instead of you sending all these unique click identifiers that could in theory identify a single user, right? So, and which is of course true, like a Google Click ID or Facebook Click ID. Google and Facebook can tie that back to a specific single user on their end, right? So that they know that unique Click ID is unique to that person. And then WebKit is saying, yeah, we will offer this API that will only give you, I think it's like a source medium campaign kind of combination or something, right? I think for marketing organizations, if you would really grill them on it, right? And really make them understand the issues with privacy coming up and figure out what do you really need, then for a lot of them, you're going to figure out like, yeah, this marketing, like optimizing on campaigns would already be amazing, right? If we could just can continue to do that and do that well, that would already be a great solution.
Yeah, because like marketing is shifting too. I mean, in the end, like we are talking about this, I think, already for 3 or 4 years. But as I already pointed out, like for example, in the B2B example that I just said, most of the stuff happens afterwards. So most of the marketing activity then happens when you basically have this kind of person who downloaded your white paper and you have it in a CRM system, and then you basically run CRM marketing. CRM marketing is a totally different thing, also like from a data perspective. And we shouldn't go into this. I think this is another episode to go into the impact of CRM data. But I think marketing is shifting too. And so this is, I think, is interesting because like maybe for this first part, like for this acquisition part, which was so powerful, I think 5 years ago, was dominating every marketing team. I would not say it definitely becomes not irrelevant because, of course, it's still important to get people from somewhere. But it's definitely getting a new role. And I think you can find systems that basically then better fit for these kind of role and which are not so, let's say, not so privacy problematic like the system that you use right now.
Yeah, 100% agreed. So let's take that example one step further. So let's say we want to go with the source medium campaign system, right? So we only the deepest level of zooming in on our data would be a campaign level, right? So we have source, medium, campaign. That's how we group users, and then we have, I don't know, for page views and some conversion points that those source, medium campaigns go through, and dates, of course. What will be your tool of choice if you go down that route?
Also, so in the project that I do, I usually use a tool called Elbwalker. So they're out of Hamburg, small startup. They have one benefit. They basically work as a headless system, because in this kind of systems, I don't care about any kind of dashboards and so on, because I don't need them. So what they do is they pipe the data directly into BigQuery. And so I can immediately use that. So I don't have to build all the pipelines myself. If I'm a bigger company and I would do a risk assessment, then I wouldn't bet on a solution from a small startup, because it's always a risk. In, let's say, bigger setups, what you could do is of course, you could go for the big solution, like the big guns, which could be like Snowplow. Snowplow, we don't have to discuss it too much, but Snowplow, I would say, has the industry best collectors, like SDKs out there. I think has the best way to handle the switch between I identify users and I don't identify users. So the Snowplow collectors is pretty flexible, that I can say, when someone comes on the website, I handle them as anonymous. And the point when they give consent, I basically switch and say, I identify you now. And at the point where they revoke it, I just switch back and clear everything. And so there are others. I think Pivik has something similar, but I think not on this kind of degree like Snowplow is doing. And so, of course, Snowplow is a great alternative for this, but you definitely have to have the organization for it. So you have to have the team that can, if you want to run it yourself, so you have to run it yourself. It's an application, and tracking applications have one problem. You cannot just restart them and get everything back. Once they are down, they're down. You don't get data. And so you really have to make sure that you can maintain it on a, let's say, really good SLA. Or you can just go to Snowplow and say, yeah, please do this for me, which they do. So this would be like the big solution, which, if I'm a company, for example, who say revenue depends on data, it would be definitely very high on my consideration list, because this could be a criteria that I can't guarantee, that my revenue comes from this kind of data. And some systems in between, for example, Pivik can definitely be a solution. So if, for example, I just need this kind of, let's say, aggregated campaign data, then I could run with them. So because I think it's possible to get the raw data as well from Pivik. At least I know that they provide it as well. But I never really experimented with it. I guess these would be maybe Matomo as well. So, but I already burned a little bit my fingers sometimes on Matomo. So I would revisit it again. So I still like the product, I like the approach, I like the philosophy, but I haven't invested a lot of time in the last 2 years into that.
Yeah, I think the question you asked at the beginning, what type of company are you, right? That's of course there are some assessments to be made, okay, how much money is at stake here? How many people do we have to maintain it? All these kind of logical things that, from the outside in, we tend to skip over. But then from the inside out, you want to build something that is, so if we speak about this 20 million a month advertising spend company, then probably, it justifies building a team that supports Snowplow, or hiring Snowplow to support it and having, you still need somebody on your end, but then Snowplow takes a bit, off of your hands. But that's easy on a 20 million a month advertising budget. You can figure that out. And yeah, if that's not the case, and if it's way less, or if it's maybe almost nothing, then there are a lot of solutions out there that that could help you go this route.
Maybe, for example, just one which I got, which I, for example, tested 1 year ago extensively and also was running on my own projects, like, for example, Plausible. Plausible is also pretty flexible when it comes to that. So you can get data out, you can run it on your own systems if you want, because in the end, it's also open source. And so there are definitely really good tools out there. If you know what you want to achieve, I think then it makes it a lot easier to select the kind of right solution, because you start to ask the right questions when you talk to these people. Because, of course, when you talk to a vendor, everything is great. The sky's the limit. Sometimes there are vendors, and I really appreciate them. They tell you where's the limit. And so for me, when I'm looking into new tools, this is the essential part I want to learn. I want to learn the limitation of a tool, because no tool is perfect. Every tool has limitations, because every tool has a good fit for a specific kind of use case. And so, like Snowplow, obvious limitation, it has a complex setup if you run it yourself. Also, like limitation, it just pumps the data in a very raw format into your data warehouse. So you have to take care what happens after that. But these are like the limitations I want to know. And if like a vendor is not open to tell you about their limitations, definitely, I would not say a red flag, but definitely an orange flag.
I always insist, whenever I talk to vendors, I always insist, like I want a technical person in the call, and I'm going to mostly talk to that technical person. And if they cannot provide that, then I'm not going to do the call, because I've been in too many sales calls where the vendor is basically promising that everything is possible. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't even understand how the tool works, right? That's not useful.
The nice thing is people who know me from LinkedIn already know this, and they already bring someone in the call who can do this. I even had people pointing this already out, so they know, I know that you don't want to have this sales thing. So I already brought our solution architect.
Yeah, you're going to ask hard questions. That. Okay, let's skip that.
Yes. And in the second minute usually. So I'm very impatient, so I don't like to see slides. So
yeah, it's also not worth it, right? It's not worth both of your time. Like
yeah, for what? Yeah, you can see it on the website.
I've been throwing this idea out on LinkedIn, but I want to have your take on this before we close off. So one of the issues of moving everything server side, which it seems like we are going to do for a variety of reasons, and I'm not specifically Google Tag Manager server side, but a server side solution. One of the downsides of that is that we remove I don't know if it's a word, but the auditability, right? Like for people to do an audit from the outside in. And I think it creates this new issue of us repeating the same mistake that got us here, right? And by us, I mean marketers, like throwing in a lot of stuff that we shouldn't, and then in the end, getting more privacy regulation and ending up in an even worse place. What do you think? What do you think we can do to improve upon that and to make sure that we don't make that same mistake?
One thing is like include data and engineers. Data and engineers, for some reasons, which I never really figured out, is like have a very good conscience about these things. So usually, like when I work with an engineering team, they usually call out things they think is ethically or morally, on thin ice. So this is not really a matter. This is just an idea. I think one thing that could work. So of course, like we could enforce it. So for example, this is ridiculous. I think let's just bring it out. So of course, like DPAs could go in, could set up audit teams, would say like, hey, your company has been selected for a great yearly audit, and so we want to see all the documentation of your setup, and maybe we also do some test runs. I mean, usually like what VCs are doing in due diligence, like going in and checking how it looks like. This will never work, so because like these agencies are not in the position, and I'm not really happy with these kind of things. So, but an alternative could be, for example, something like that you see in production and so on. So where you have some specific kind of labels and standards. So like the, I think ISO 9000 and something like this, where you can basically, a company can prove, we did this kind of measures, and these, to get these certifications, they're pretty hard. So you really have to document a lot. So you really have showcase. So basically what I just described in the other example as well. It's like, so that you can use these kind of labels to gain trust. You can say like, yeah, so our company is data ISO, blah, 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 approved, and use it as a marketing and customer trust thing. And then I think this could be, so I'm more like a friend of, let's say, kind of voluntary measures, but with a benefit. And so I would go like this. And the good thing is also like it can introduce standardizers and standards, because I think some companies might want to do this, but they don't know how. So this is also a problem. If you have some kind of, let's say, standard approach, then at least you have some measures that you have to implement it like this. So, for example, password rotation within your company on these kind of things. I mean, simple measures, but still you increase security.
I really like that idea. I think if let's say all tag manager solution providers, if they would all adopt this, and then they would all have a hashing method for a field, for a variable field, and that is certified by that ISO standard. So okay, we hash via that standard, and we can prove it if you export our GTM JSON, right? You can see that it's hashed that way. Those kind of things.
Oh, that tags are certified. So, I mean, that would be also cool. Like when you use, let's say, a Facebook tag, and okay, like everyone is skeptical about Facebook, but it's still like, for example, they have the certification that at least you know to which kind of standards they apply. I mean, they can do other things beyond these kind of standards, but you still know, okay, these kind of things are already.
I think we, and I say this broadly, we should take it upon us to, with the move to server side. I think Timo Ava said, with great power comes great responsibility. You can do whatever you want with server side tag manager, right? Sky's the limit. It's from a technical point of view, it's really cool, right? But it also opens up Pandora's box when it comes to ruining privacy even more. And in the end, it will come out. That's what you see right now with all the lawsuits against Facebook and all these other companies. You see, they just keep digging, and they keep, eventually it will come out. And you also, like, let's assume that up until this point, a lot of people did what they did not out of wanting to do bad, but simply because of not understanding that what they implemented might result in this. But now I think the time has come to realize, like, okay, we can't get away with that excuse anymore. We should probably try to do better and proactively show that we are doing better, because otherwise our nice tools will be taken away from us.
I think this is a really, really good summary. And especially like with great power comes great responsibility. I think this is definitely true. And the interesting thing I think you just said, and maybe this is something I can now tell other people as well, is like things usually come out. Sometimes it takes years, but they come out. Things fall, if you do, and often these are things where you do it not by accident, but really on a conscious decision. And sometimes some people will speak, so because they don't think that is a good idea, and things come out. I think this is like maybe also like a good warning for companies embracing the dark side of server-side tag manager.
Good point. Good point to close this talk off on. It was a great talk. Where can people find you online? Is there anything else you want to share with people before we close out?
So I think the easiest way is really to find me on LinkedIn, because I write there regularly. And so, yeah, you can just put in my name and then you can find me. And if you like to learn how to create really good tracking plans, so not like the bloated ones, but really like the precise ones. So I'm currently running a free course. And so if you check on LinkedIn, or if you know, on my website, it's not linked yet.
We'll put the link in the show notes below.
Yeah. Okay. That's nice. Yeah. So like, but I will post about it more regularly on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn, then you will find it. And I hope it helps.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. You share a lot of good content and thoughts on there. So I can recommend people to follow. Cool. Then I think we're definitely going to have another podcast in the future, but thanks for today. And let's talk soon.
Thank you very much.